I grew up in Kent. I actually, in terms of subjects, I actually studied kind of maths, chemistry, physics, biology, Spanish for my A-levels, and the odds were that I would go into medicine. And so I was highly weighing up medicine and law in terms of career progression and what to study at university, and for some reason no other subject really appealed for the subject in and of itself. It was one of those two. And in the end, I went for law because I loved debating. At the time, I was kind of English speaking union champion. I did various other debating competitions, and the pull of my perception of what reading law at Oxford would be, effectively debating all the time, was the pull that ended up trumping perhaps going down a vocational course and a career in medicine, which I ended up actually saying to somebody, I could pick something that might become easier and more naturally to me, i.e. studying kind of sciences and medicine, or something that's perhaps harder, but which I know would fuel a passion, and that I feel if I read something that I'm passionate about in and of itself, that is what gives me the best building blocks to then thrive in what I study. And then in terms of Oxford, I actually just viewed all the universities as everybody does, and when it came down to certain universities, Oxford is obviously a centre of excellence, so it was almost a dream to go there, certainly a dream of my family. And you know, of all the universities that were high up there, Oxford for me seemed like the place where you could go and really immerse yourself in learning, yet also immerse yourself in all of the other social and kind of community-orientated aspects that I was already doing at school. So I was already involved in a lot of activities, I was already doing a few things like the debating that I mentioned, but also I was kind of a schoolhouse captain and various other sports, and all the people I met at Oxford seemed to be of that ilk. They loved reading what the subject they were reading, but they also loved doing all the other things that they did that made up their life. It's actually interesting. So my parents were born in Tanzania. They're third generation Tanzanians, and they moved over in '71 for nationalisation. And my mum actually got a phone call from her mother to say, oh, that man who's singing on the doorstep to you, do you want to marry him on Wednesday? Because he's getting on a plane on Thursday and going to England. And on Friday, or the equivalent, things are going to get bad here in Tanzania. So do you want to do that? My mum being 17, my dad 24, my mum was like, sure. And she jokes today, like, had I known then what I know now about your father, I would have thought twice. But they're very happily married to this day. And so they made the move, they made the jump. And then actually the next, I suppose, one of the next in terms of my life journey, pivotal points, when I was about 8 years old, my father got a call to move back to Tanzania by his father. When he left to move to England, my grandfather had said, you go, you make a life in England, and one day you come back and you help your brothers and sisters and the rest of the family. And that call came when I was 8 years old. So my dad did move back. He helped his brother and the other family members in Tanzania, and my mum stayed in England for me, for my education. And so until I turned 18, my father and my mother lived apart, kind of cross country, and at that time in the world was a lot larger than it is today. It was the one fax a week, the one kind of trip to see mum and dad, and for that reason education is absolutely a priority for me, partly because I know I'm very keenly aware of the sacrifice that my parents made so that I could get the education that I had the opportunity to receive in my life. I matriculated in 2002. I went to Brasenose College, Oxford. I read jurisprudence or law, as I like to say. In terms of societies, I was briefly part of a college society for the summer ball for one of the years. I participated in hockey, albeit not really to any kind of even quasi-professional standard, but I did attend the Docksbridge hockey event. To be honest, I think to sum it all up, I was one of those lucky ones. I really enjoyed reading law. I loved all of the different things I was learning about. I loved the process of talking through everything I was reading with my tutors, and then the way of learning at Oxford. And then also the other side of living in Oxford, the life that you get to live. It's just a beautiful city. The people are fantastic. to go from, you think you're worldly, especially when maybe you're a second generation child living in this country, but to go from my friend circle in Kent, where everyone's sort of similar and you're all in the similar school, to go to Oxford, where you really are surrounded by diversity in its truest sense, people from all over the country, all over the world, coming together through a shared passion for all talking about and reading the same subject. That, for me, it's still a very formative chapter in my life when I look back for that reason. Like I said, I was fortunate in that, as well as enjoying the study of law, I carried out a couple of vacation schemes in my second year at Oxford and absolutely loved what I saw to be, in my perception at that time, of the application of law. And through that, I tried various things in terms of a kind of barrister route, family law. What I really enjoyed was the city and the firms that I went and spent time in. They resonated with me in terms of, I can see this type of environment as being one that I would really enjoy being in permanently. And so when I graduated, I then went on to do my LPC. I didn't need to do any kind of conversion. I took 6 months off where I learned how to teach people to scuba dive. So I did a dive master, and then I worked in Thailand for a little bit and joined my training firm, Levels, at the time. And then from there, I did my training contract, various different seats, qualified into corporate and private equity. I was a bit of a hybrid at the time. I stayed for a couple of years, really enjoyed the work that I was doing and the firm that I was at, but felt it was the right time to move to another firm. So I moved across to an American-based law firm, and then from there made partner in 2015 and moved again with 5 other partners and a team of 11 associates to my now current firm, where I am still partner. And we've since grown it to a team of over 20 partners and 50 associates, and that's the path since matriculation. I'd say, taking a step back, for me, I'm really interested in women and women's position in law generally, and it's over the last 5 or 6 years that interest has come into fruition for me. So when I started my career, I was very fortunate. I had read law as one of 7 in a group of 8 females. And when I trained, I was one of 33 out of a total group of 37. And it was only when I was probably about 3 or 4 years post-qualification that I started to notice that all of the women that were driven, ambitious, highly intelligent, and in my peer group, and the peers that I wanted to continue this profession with, I wanted us to keep their talent within the profession, those of my peers had increasingly started to leave. So for me, Oxford Women in Law, I hope, is the start of not just any network or a network of women, but a support system, and a support system that starts earlier on perhaps in people's journey into law, such that when they do reach higher qualification levels, or if you're in the bar in different seniorities, the building blocks of support, of peer, of discussion, of dialogue, of all the factors that go into what it is to be a woman working in law are already quite well run and run to ground. So I'd say the advice that I'd want to give for students who are currently thinking about a career in law, I'd say first, just focus on yourself. I think there's a lot of pressures that can come and make you perhaps lose focus. Focus about your peers, focus on the firm, focus on the work, but actually focus on yourself always. All you have to do is do the best that you can and keep learning, and focus on the next step to keep learning. Don't worry about the bigger picture. Don't necessarily worry about the macros. Just keep focusing on each tiny little extra step that you need to learn to get you to that next step. Because law, for me, is a bit like a Tetris game. You unlock things, and as you unlock things, you unlock more things. And sometimes the linear nature of law as a profession, which is starting to change, albeit it is quite linear, that there is an aspect of layering that comes to the learning process of law as from a career perspective. That layering can seem daunting, but actually it's very short-lived that layering and that learning needs to exist for. After you've done the layers and the learning in the course of a career of 30 or 40 years, it's only about 6 to 8 years where you're doing that sort of process. Actually, then you're ready to really fly. So I would say, know your strengths, be resilient, stay positive, and equally know for yourselves who you need to trust and then put your trust in them. In 100 years, I think we've clearly come a long way. So that's something to absolutely be proud of. And a lot of fantastic role models have set the path for us. And now that we sit here in 2019, I think we need to continue to look at equality in the wider picture and now take this almost privileged position from where we sit, where there sometimes some of the aspects of discrimination that our predecessors had to face perhaps aren't as express and obvious and in our face, but there's still an issue with numbers and women in law in particular. So I think we need to look at what are the detail points now, what's going on underneath the river, what's running along that keeps, for some reason, our stats as they are. And for me, one of the biggest points is looking at things like transparency. For me, that's the biggest point for women in law. How do we make sure that women know that they can succeed and succeed in the longer term, not just in the near and short term, like short-term project gains? How can women succeed, and how can we make sure that they know that they can succeed as early on as possible, and then support them in that growth journey to success? So what are the elements of, depending on what part of the law you're in and practice of law, what are the elements taking the solicitor route of business development, mentoring, supporting the lifestyle choices that people want to lead? I think all of these are factors that we need to continue to look at and continue to make sure that we are open to listening to the messages that we are receiving from that generation and actually answering the actual issues as they see it and as they perceive it.